Hannah Blake never imagined her 28th birthday would be the last day of her life. A night that began with laughter, music, and love, but ended with blood on the kitchen floor and her fiancé's secret buried beneath the glow of fairy lights. Hannah Blake had always been the kind of person people admired without envy. She had an effortless charm, a way of making others feel comfortable, and a smile that could light up any room. On the morning of her 28th birthday, she woke to messages from friends, plans from her fiancé Ethan Cole, and calls from her mother reminding her not to overdo things. Life seemed perfectly aligned. Her house in Willow Creek was modest but beautiful, with white picket fencing and a neatly trimmed garden that she loved tending to after work. She had arranged a small get-together for the evening, just close friends, family, and a few co-workers. It wasn't meant to be extravagant, only warm and simple, the way she liked things. By the time afternoon rolled around, the decorations were ready. Golden balloons floated above the patio. Fairy lights were strung along the fence, and a playlist of her favorite songs hummed through a portable speaker. The air smelled faintly of roses from her garden, and the vanilla cake waiting on the kitchen counter. Hannah moved around her home humming softly, adjusting the candles on the table and glancing occasionally at her reflection. Everything had to be perfect. It was her last birthday as a single woman. She and Ethan were planning to marry in the fall. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, guests arrived one by one. Megan, her best friend since high school, showed up first with a bouquet of lilies. Tyler, Hannah's ex-boyfriend, appeared unexpectedly, claiming he wanted to wish her well and put the past behind them. Ethan arrived late, blaming traffic, though his mood seemed oddly tense. Still, Hannah brushed it off, refusing to let anything spoil her night. Laughter soon filled the yard, glasses clinked, and for a few hours everything felt right. But beneath the cheerfulness, something darker lingered. Ethan barely smiled. He stood apart, watching Hannah interact with others, especially Tyler, who kept finding reasons to talk to her. Megan noticed it too, the stiffness in Ethan's posture, the flicker of irritation when Hannah laughed a little too freely. A few guests sensed tension but dismissed it as harmless relationship drama. Hannah, unaware of the growing unease around her, continued to entertain, moving between guests and ensuring everyone felt welcome. Around 10:30, the music softened and people began to leave. The night air grew cooler, carrying the faint hum of crickets from the nearby park. Only a few remained: Ethan, Megan, and one of Hannah's co-workers. By 11, everyone had gone except Ethan. The lights outside were still twinkling, the cake half-eaten, and the yard quiet except for the rustle of leaves. Neighbors later recalled seeing Hannah and Ethan arguing softly by the fence, their voices too low to make out. Shortly after, the lights inside flickered off. When the clock struck midnight, the quiet suburban street was completely still. The following morning, when Hannah's mother couldn't reach her, she grew worried. Calls went unanswered and messages were left unread. By noon, she drove over, expecting to find her daughter asleep after the long night. But the moment she opened the front door, something felt wrong. The house was silent, the faint scent of wine and wax lingering in the air. The decorations from the party still hung in place, mocking the grim stillness that filled the rooms. In the kitchen, her mother found Hannah lying motionless on the tiled floor, surrounded by shards of glass and streaks of blood. The cake knife was missing and the back door was unlocked. Panic flooded through her as she screamed for help, her voice echoing down the empty street. Within minutes, neighbors gathered outside and the first police car arrived. The celebration had turned into a crime scene. What had begun as a day of joy had ended in unthinkable tragedy. As detectives cordoned off the area and forensic teams entered the home, one question echoed through every whisper and every heart in Willow Creek. Who would kill Hannah Blake on her birthday? Detective Laura Mason arrived at the scene shortly after noon, her face set with the practiced calm of someone who had seen far too much. But even she felt the weight of this one. The streamers hanging from the walls, The untouched cake still sitting on the counter and the faint scent of perfume in the air made it painfully clear that this wasn't just another murder. It was supposed to be a celebration. Now it was a nightmare frozen in time. The first assessment of the scene told her one thing. This was personal. There was no sign of forced entry, no valuables missing, and no random chaos. Whoever had done this knew Hannah well enough to be comfortable walking into her home. The attack was violent, deliberate, and cruel. It wasn't about money or robbery. It was about rage. The medical examiner confirmed that Hannah had been struck on the back of the head with a heavy object before being stabbed twice. The blow had likely rendered her unconscious, but the stabbing was what killed her. The estimated time of death was around midnight, only a short while after the last guests had left. A half-empty glass of red wine sat on the counter near her body. There were fingerprints on it, though smudged, and a faint trail of blood led from the kitchen to the back door, where someone had tried to clean up. Detective Mason began by interviewing those who attended the party. Ethan Cole, the fiancé, was first on her list. He seemed grief-stricken but distant, answering questions with the kind of precision that felt rehearsed. He said they had argued briefly about Tyler showing up, but insisted he left before things got out of hand. When asked why he didn't call Hannah later that night, he said she wanted space. Mason noted the flatness in his voice, the lack of tears, and the way he avoided eye contact. Then came Megan, the best friend. Her eyes were red from crying, her voice shaking as she spoke. She told the detective she had car trouble that night and couldn't make it to the party, though she tried calling Hannah several times. But her phone records told a different story. She had called Hannah only once, and that was after midnight, well past the time of death. When confronted with that, Megan claimed she must have misremembered because she was upset. Mason didn't buy it but kept her suspicions to herself. Tyler, the ex-boyfriend, was another mystery. He admitted coming to the party but insisted he stayed only a few minutes. According to him, he wanted closure, a chance to wish Hannah well and finally move on. However, one of the neighbors had seen a car matching his parked down the street around midnight. Tyler denied it, saying he was home by then, but his nervous demeanor told a different story. Days passed and tensions grew. Rumors spread across Willow Creek like wildfire. Some said Ethan was hiding something. Others swore it had to be Tyler, driven by jealousy. A few whispered about Megan, saying she'd always been too attached to Hannah. The police received anonymous tips, most of them nonsense, but one stood out. A caller claimed to have seen a figure walking around the back of Hannah's house just before midnight, dressed in dark clothing. Unfortunately, the caller didn't see their face. Forensics teams worked around the clock. They dusted for prints, searched for DNA, and analyzed every inch of the house. A faint bloody handprint was found on the doorframe leading to the backyard, too smudged for a clear match. What puzzled Mason most was the missing cake knife. It wasn't in the sink, the trash, or the dishwasher. Someone had taken it. The deeper she dug, the clearer one truth became. Hannah Blake's murder wasn't the act of a stranger passing through town. It was intimate, emotional, and filled with betrayal. Someone who had smiled with her that night had also taken her life, and as Mason reviewed the timeline again and again, she couldn't shake the thought that the killer hadn't planned to do it at first. Something must have happened during that final hour, something that turned celebration into violence. The detective stood in Hannah's empty living room late one evening, looking at the faint reflections of the fairy light still taped to the window. The case was full of questions, but she had a feeling the answers were closer than anyone realized. In a town where everyone seemed connected, it was only a matter of time before one secret unraveled the rest. A week passed, and the case of Hannah Blake's murder had already become the only topic of conversation in Willow Creek. Every neighbor, every friend, every coworker had an opinion, and the police tip line was flooded with theories. But among the noise, one small clue emerged. A neighbor across the street had installed a motion sensor camera after recent car break-ins. The footage was grainy and low quality, but at exactly 11:32 p.m. on the night of the murder, it captured someone entering Hannah's backyard through the side gate. The figure moved quickly, dressed in dark clothes, their face obscured by a hood. The most striking detail was the flicker of a gold bracelet on their wrist as they reached for the latch. Detective Mason replayed that footage over and over, zooming in as much as possible. The bracelet caught her attention. It looked familiar. When she checked photos of Hannah and her friends from social media, her suspicion grew stronger. In several pictures, Megan, Hannah's best friend, wore a similar gold bracelet. It had been a gift from Hannah the year before. Mason couldn't ignore the coincidence. Megan had claimed she never made it to the party, yet here was a figure matching her build, wearing something identical to what she owned, entering the backyard minutes before the murder. When confronted with the footage, Megan's reaction was immediate panic. Her hands trembled as she insisted she wasn't there, that she was home the entire night. She said anyone could have a bracelet like that, but her voice wavered, and her eyes darted toward the camera still image on the detective's tablet. She broke down halfway through the questioning, admitting she had gone to Hannah's house after all. According to her, she arrived late, around 11:30, to drop off a gift and apologize for missing the party. She claimed she saw the house dark, assumed everyone had left, and decided not to knock. Then she left. It sounded plausible, but the problem was the timeline. The security footage showed her entering, not leaving, and the killer had struck around midnight. Detective Mason ordered a search of Megan's apartment. Inside a laundry basket, forensics found a black sweatshirt with faint reddish stains. The initial field test confirmed traces of blood. When the results came back from the lab, the match was devastating. It was Hannah's. Megan was arrested 2 days later. The town erupted. People couldn't believe it. The same Megan who had been at every fundraiser with Hannah, who called her sister, who spoke at her memorial service, was now being accused of her murder. The media descended on Willow Creek and headlines spread everywhere. Best friend turned killer. Megan's tearful mugshot filled screens and papers. To the public, the case seemed solved. The motive, they said, was jealousy. Megan couldn't handle Hannah's engagement to Ethan, the man she secretly wanted for herself. Detective Mason wanted to believe it too, but something about it didn't sit right. Megan's confession didn't match the crime scene details. She knew nothing about the missing cake knife, the wiped surfaces, or the blood smudges near the door. Her story was messy, confused, but not violent. Mason couldn't shake the sense that someone else was pulling the strings. While Megan sat in a holding cell, another piece of evidence surfaced. A local teen had been scrolling through social media videos and stumbled on a clip from the night of the party. Someone had filmed a short story outside Hannah's house around 10:45 p.m. In the reflection of a car window, barely visible, was Ethan's car parked near the curb. He had claimed to leave much earlier. Mason felt a chill as she stared at the frame. If Ethan had stayed longer than he admitted, then everything about that night needed re-examining. Maybe Megan wasn't lying entirely. Maybe someone had set her up. Still, with Hannah's blood found in her apartment and her bracelet seen in the footage, the case against Megan seemed airtight. She was charged with second-degree murder and awaited trial, maintaining her innocence from behind bars. But as Detective Mason looked over the evidence one last time that night, she couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. The blood pattern on Megan's sweatshirt seemed too clean, too deliberate, as if it had been placed there. Not from a struggle, but from someone trying to create one. For the first time, she began to consider a darker possibility, that the real killer had carefully crafted a story, planting clues to lead investigators in the wrong direction. And if that was true, the killer was still out there, calm, patient, and watching everything unfold exactly as planned. The case against Megan Hayes seemed solid at first glance. The evidence, the bracelet, the sweatshirt, the timing, it all pointed toward her. But Detective Laura Mason couldn't shake the unease that lingered with every new piece of information. Something about it felt too convenient, too neatly arranged. She had seen killers make mistakes before, small errors that revealed the truth. But this time, it seemed like someone had gone out of their way to create those mistakes on purpose. 2 weeks before Megan's trial, Mason requested a complete forensic re-examination of all the evidence, including the sweatshirt that had sealed her fate. What came back changed everything. The lab report showed that the bloodstains were inconsistent with the time of death. The samples were too fresh, suggesting they had been placed there at least 12 hours after Hannah had died. The discovery meant one thing: the blood had been planted. Megan couldn't have done that while being interrogated and later detained. Someone had deliberately tried to frame her. With the new findings, Mason ordered a deeper analysis of Hannah's phone data. Most of it had been examined before, but now the digital forensics team recovered deleted messages from the cloud backup. Among them were several heated exchanges between Hannah and her fiancé, Ethan Cole. The messages revealed growing tension in their relationship. Hannah had accused Ethan of being controlling and jealous. He, in turn, accused her of lying and hinted at an affair. The last message he sent the night of her murder read chillingly, "If you're hiding something from me, I'll find out tonight." The tone of those words made Mason's stomach twist. Ethan had been there that night. He admitted leaving after an argument, but the new evidence suggested otherwise. When she reviewed the video that had surfaced online, showing his car parked near the house later than he claimed, the picture started to form clearly. Ethan had lied, and not just once. Mason brought Ethan back in for questioning. This time she watched him closely. His grief seemed more performative than genuine, his responses rehearsed. When confronted with the recovered messages, his confident demeanor cracked. He fumbled through his explanations, saying the texts didn't mean anything, that he was only angry and jealous because of Hannah's ex showing up. But Mason noticed the way his hands shook and the way his voice faltered when she mentioned the planted blood. Forensics teams searched Ethan's car again, this time focusing on small, overlooked areas. In the trunk, beneath a folded blanket, they found a kitchen knife wrapped in a towel. It was the missing cake knife. The handle was wiped clean, but traces of Hannah's blood were still on the blade. That single piece of evidence unraveled everything. Faced with undeniable proof, Ethan broke down. His confession came out slowly, through trembling words and quiet tears. He admitted that he had followed Hannah to the kitchen after their guests left. He was angry, convinced she had been unfaithful. When she told him she was done with the constant accusations, he lost control. He struck her with a wine bottle, and when she fell, he grabbed the nearest knife and stabbed her. It happened so quickly, he said, that he didn't even realize what he was doing until it was too late. Panic consumed him afterward. He tried to clean up but couldn't remove all the traces. In desperation, he decided to redirect suspicion. He remembered Megan's close bond with Hannah and how protective she was. That night, he went to Megan's apartment under the pretense of returning some of Hannah's belongings. While she wasn't home, he found her laundry basket and rubbed some of Hannah's blood on her sweatshirt. Later, he even dropped hints about her jealousy during police interviews to make the story believable. By the time Mason finished hearing his confession, the room felt suffocatingly silent. She thought of Megan, sitting in a cell for a crime she didn't commit, her life destroyed by a man pretending to mourn his fiancée. The betrayal ran deeper than she expected. Ethan Cole wasn't just a murderer. He was a manipulator who had carefully turned grief into a mask. When news of his arrest spread, the town was stunned once again. Megan was released immediately, but her relief was mixed with devastation. The truth couldn't undo the damage done to her reputation, nor could it bring Hannah back. Ethan's motive was as old as time: jealousy, control, and fear of losing someone he wanted to possess completely. Detective Mason stood outside the courthouse as Ethan was led away in handcuffs, flashing cameras surrounding him. For all the months of confusion and chaos, one truth was finally clear. Hannah Blake's murder was never about passion or accident. It was about power, and the darkness that hides behind the face of love. The courtroom was packed on the morning Ethan Cole faced sentencing. Every seat was filled with reporters, townspeople, and those who had once called Hannah Blake a friend. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers and the distant clicking of cameras. Ethan stood motionless, his hands cuffed, his expression hollow. The man who had once promised Hannah a lifetime of love now stood as the one who had stolen her future. His confession had left no room for doubt, yet it was his lack of remorse that chilled everyone the most. Detective Laura Mason sat in the back row, observing quietly. She had seen countless trials, but this one weighed on her differently. Every detail of the case, from the shattered glass in the kitchen to the planted evidence in Megan's apartment, had left a mark on her. It wasn't just the brutality of the act. It was the deception, the cold precision of how Ethan had tried to destroy someone else's life to save his own. When the judge read the sentence and life in prison without parole, a collective sigh filled the room. Justice had been served, but peace still felt distant. Megan sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on the man who had ruined her life. Even after being cleared, she carried the invisible scars of accusation. Her face was pale, her expression somewhere between sorrow and disbelief. She had spent weeks being treated like a monster, ridiculed online and whispered about in every corner of town. The damage could never be undone. When Ethan glanced at her briefly before being led away, she didn't look away. There was no hatred in her eyes, only exhaustion, the kind that comes from knowing the truth too late. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. Willow Creek, a town once known for its safety and warmth, had become a symbol of betrayal. People struggled to reconcile the image of Ethan Cole, the charming fiancé, the devoted partner, with the cold killer revealed in court. The more they learned about his possessive nature, the more they realized how well he had hidden his darkness behind a gentle smile. The community felt violated, their sense of trust shattered. Even the quiet streets seemed different now, like the peace had been stripped away permanently. In the days that followed, Hannah's house remained sealed off, its rooms emptied but still heavy with memory. The neighbors avoided walking too close, glancing at the windows as if expecting to see her smiling face again. The fairy lights in the backyard still hung from the fence, faded and weathered, fluttering in the wind like ghosts of a happier time. Every reminder of that night, the cake, the candles, the decorations, had been taken as evidence, leaving behind only echoes of what once was. Detective Mason visited the site one last time before the property was sold. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the faint stain on the tile where Hannah's life had ended. The room was silent, but Mason could almost hear the faint laughter that once filled it, the sound of music drifting through the walls, and the clinking of glasses during a celebration that was never meant to end in tragedy. She thought about the choices that led to this moment, the jealousy, the fear, the lies, and how quickly love can turn into something dangerous when trust disappears. Megan eventually moved away from Willow Creek, unable to stay in the place where her best friend died and where her own life had been torn apart. She left quietly, without fanfare or goodbyes, hoping distance might bring healing. For months she sent flowers to Hannah's grave, always the same kind. White lilies, the ones she brought to the party that night. It was her way of saying sorry, even though she had nothing to be sorry for. Ethan spent his days in silence behind prison walls. He never spoke about what drove him to do it, never asked for forgiveness, never wrote a letter of regret. His name faded from the headlines, replaced by new stories, but the shadow of his crime remained in the hearts of those who knew Hannah. In time, Willow Creek returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was never quite the same. The story of Hannah Blake became a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors, a reminder that evil doesn't always come from strangers in the dark, but from those who claim to love us most. On warm June nights when the breeze carried the scent of roses through the streets, People still remembered the woman whose laughter once filled the air. Her birthday would forever mark not the beginning of another year, but the night when love turned into murder, and a bright life was extinguished beneath the glow of fairy lights.